I met Jean in the summer of 1978. That was the summer I worked part-time at the Hammer Factory and participated in summer music theater, also known as SMUT. Jean was the director for the first show I auditioned for as a community volunteer actor, My Fair Lady. In my sophomore year in high school, I'd landed a bit speaking part in that musical of Zoltan Karpathy, the Hungarian voice teacher who thinks he's discovered Eliza's ruse at the embassy ball in a short scene at the end of Act 1. I'd auditioned for Henry Higgins, but the part was given to a senior. The part I auditioned for Jean was Alfred Doolittle, Eliza's father. I gave a pretty good audition, was even called back, but the part was given to a grad student, member of the company. I got the bit speaking part of the pub owner and did general chorus duties. Jean was a strict, dry director. He was a large, imposing man who smoked like a chimney. He gave very clear direction to every actor, no matter how small or large the part was. He was also known to be brutal with actors who didn't meet his expectations. He never shouted or ranted or raved, he simply ignored you. Being ignored by Jean was humiliating. I took note of that technique and used it a lot with kids in ESL classes years later. Jean later cast me as the talent agent Larry Hastings, a bit-speaking role again, in Bells Are Ringing. More chorus duty. The company was really small, so except for lead actors, we all pretty well did chorus duty. I'm not sure if I was cast for this role because I deserved it or because there just weren't enough male company members for all the bit-speaking roles available, or because I was an enthusiastic member of the community supporting this summer theater program with my free time and dedication. The next summer, 1979, I volunteered again. Sound of Music was Jean's production. Again, he cast me in a bit-speaking role. I mentioned it last time, Franz the butler. I remember us having an in-depth chat about Franz, who he was, what his past had been, what his political affiliations were. We decided together that he was the snitch who had alerted the Nazis to the Von Trapp's plans of escaping Austria. That chat was one of the best acting classes I'd had to date. Jean making me realize that even the smallest part is important to the play. That same summer, I also auditioned for Kiss Me Kate. That one was directed by Jared, the theater history professor who would later become my student advisor. I don't think Jared thought much of me. I only did chorus duty in that musical. Didn't like the musical much either. It was very long and dramatic. 1980 was the year that I auditioned and got accepted for the paid SMUT company. I had to register as a student and earn 12 credits for my work that summer, both as a costume shop supervisor and as an actor in the 3 musicals we presented. Chorus member in Of Thee I Sing, a really outdated Gershwin musical, but Jean chose it because of the election year, that year that Ronald Reagan won his first term. Chorus member in Finian's Rainbow, directed by Mim, the department's voice and dialect teacher, and the captain of the Inquisition in Man of La Mancha. Jean directed this one as well. I didn't do chorus duty in the last one. I instead designed the makeup for Don Quixote. Since I was enrolled at university, I was able to receive that Social Security orphans benefit again, at least to the age of, I think, 25. I'd lost my part of the benefits on graduating from high school and not continuing my education, but I managed to get them reinstated, and because my brother and sister became ineligible when they joined the military, the entire check came to me. That was certainly a help, though my mom somehow managed to get her hands on most of that money. Jean taught my first university acting class and tutored me in playwriting. I was writing a family drama, of course, called What the Americans Found When They Landed in Okinawa, mainly based on my own dysfunctional family, and I made a comment about not wanting to write bit-speaking parts. Jean asked me why. I said that being cast so often in bit-speaking roles myself, I found myself sitting at rehearsals looking at other actors on the stage that I wanted to be on. He reminded me again of that earlier lesson, no part is a small part. That next summer, 1981, I didn't do the smut thing. I instead spent the summer in Buffalo, New York, recreating my role in the resistible rise of Arturo Ui, as well as managing costumes and makeup for the show. I'd never spent so much time in the big city, and I was determined to leave the Midwest behind me and move out east once I finished up the 1981-82 school year. Everyone knew that this was my goal. The autumn semester of 1981, I took mainly graduate-level classes, despite not having done the core curriculum. You see, I didn't consider university as a means towards a degree. Jared, that director who became my advisor, was always advising me to take the core curriculum, and I ignored that advice. I actually only took 5 classes outside of the theater department. 2 were tap dancing and classical ballet in the PE department. 2 were summer classes I took on returning from Buffalo, mainly to keep my benefits alive, art history and social psychology. And 1, short story, just because I like short story study. I considered university as a training, a practice ground to get me ready to look for practical work on the East Coast when I moved out there at the end of the summer. I also decided that I wasn't going to pursue acting anymore. If I were only talented enough to get roles with 5 or 10 lines, if I was going to spend all my time at rehearsals learning everyone else's lines through pure repetition, I must not be good enough to follow through on acting. I focused on direction and management. I managed the box office in front of house, which paid for part of my tuition, and I took all the directing and script analysis and theater history classes available. I wanted information and practice. I was paying for this education anyway. No superfluous classes for me. I began that autumn directing Antigone by Jean Anouilh. I'd spent hours in the university library in Buffalo researching the play. My proposal was accepted for grad-level directing class. The show turned out good enough that Jared, who I was sure disliked me, recommended me for a full scholarship and talent grant, and I got both. That December, I directed an adaptation of A Christmas Carol called Scrooge, a one-man musical fantasy. I'd written and performed the show myself for community clubs and the like years earlier. Jared, who was tutoring me for playwriting that year, thought the script was problematic. Gene asked me if I'd be willing to work with him in adapting it for the regional touring theater company. I think at that moment I ignored them both. The spring semester gave me the opportunity to direct 3 shows. No one agreed with the first I chose to direct. My direction advisor for the show, that dialect and voice coach, Mim, asked me if I really felt ready for such a heavy, complex play. My grad school classmates all encouraged me to choose a modern show with less complications, more realism. I, of course, argued back that you couldn't get more realistic than Henrik Ibsen. The play was Ghosts. I also manipulated my way into being the first studio theater show of that semester, which meant I could use the small studio theater for rehearsals. Otherwise, I'd have had to rehearse in some classroom, and I wanted the atmosphere of that theater, which had been built in the 30s and never brought up to date. Everything was perfect, except I couldn't get any actor to take the main male role of Pastor Manders. Gene calls me into his office one day. That wasn't all that unusual. I remember the time he called me in the day after the 1982 Tony Awards and how the two of us simply gushed over Jennifer Holliday's performance of And I Am Telling You, how powerful it was, how it didn't matter that we didn't understand half of what she was singing. Her emoting was enough to get her an award and make our spines shiver. Gene was directing A Raisin in the Sun, which was being sponsored by the African American Studies Department. That department had managed to convince Lynn Hamilton to do a guest appearance in the play. No one really knew who Lynn Hamilton was until you reminded them that she had a recurring role on The Waltons and Sanford and Son. She was one of those actresses who always seemed to be cast in those bit speaking roles. This time she would be playing the main role of the matriarch of the family. Gene wanted to know if I would audition for a bit speaking role in the play. It was the only role for a white actor, Carl Linder, a spokesman from the all-white neighborhood the black family has bought a house in, who offers to buy that house to prevent them from disturbing the racial balance of his neighborhood. This was a very small role, only one scene, but it was an intense character, and I would have jumped at it before. What's more, Gene pointed out that I still hadn't found anyone to play Pastor Manders. He flat out told me that if I auditioned, I'd get the Linder role, and that he would be more than happy to play the role of Manders in my production. This sounds a bit odd, but it wasn't unusual for Gene. He'd done this in the past. I was really honored and thought hard about it, just the idea of directing my mentor, having him and his talent, and surely some of his advice, would make all the naysayers eat their words about me doing something less challenging, modern, realistic. But I didn't accept. The only way that he and I could make this work was if I pushed back the production of my show, since both would be in rehearsal at the same time. And because I'd been really boring and repetitive and manipulative and maybe even tricky in getting that first slot in order to fit in 2 more directing projects that semester instead of just 1, I turned him down. Just telling this anecdote reminds me of what a foolish, stupid mistake that decision was. Gene was instrumental in making sure that I was given the job of assistant managing director for Smut that summer semester. The managing director, who was a scenic designer, didn't know me all that well, and also didn't seem to like me that much, though he did compliment me to others on my design of the poster for Antigone earlier that year. I'd been doing Smut for years, I had connections in the community, I knew the program very well, and landed the job, and actually was more managing director than the one collecting the paycheck for it. He spent the summer designing the sets instead. Just as Smut was beginning, Gene called out to me from his office again. He asked me what my plans were for after the summer semester. I was a little surprised that he didn't seem to know. I'd been telling everyone that I was headed back to Buffalo to try to find work in the theater scene there, kind of like a stepping stone towards New York City. Easier because I had friends in Buffalo who would put me up and help me get started. Gene offered me the job of stage director and manager for the regional touring theater company, with the added perk of adapting and directing that Christmas show of mine. Can you believe that I turned him down again? I did. My plans were made. I was getting out of the Midwest, no matter how strongly that hometown magnet tried to keep me there. I didn't get out of the Midwest that summer, though. Something else got in the way. Gene passed away in 2008. He was just a year older than I am as I tell this story. He spent almost his entire 30-plus year theatrical career in that small Midwestern university town. He wasn't an easy man to get along with, but I think he saw that I wasn't going to be either. We never became friends, but we did seem to understand one another, and he is one of the few professors or teachers that I continue to refer back to as I move forward myself. And all things considered, he actually was a huge bit speaking role in the drama of my life. Okay, don't forget to listen, like, subscribe, and share. Cheers.
You're listening to Radio Revel. Listen, like, subscribe, and share.